from a rep standpoint, this is you understanding how to use the tools effectively so that you don't perceive that they're slowing you down. Again, I work with a number of individual sellers coaching. They're maybe with, smaller companies or companies that haven't taken that step yet, but they're an individual who sees the writing on the wall. They're like, I need to take this on. I want to differentiate myself. And I've been saying this for over 2 years now. Very rare is AI going to replace you outright, especially in our job. It's going to often be the people who can use AI and be able to show up in that interview and say, I can do a little bit more. I can work a little bit faster. That's kind of the call to action for them is, again, working with myself or working with others to really see how you can make this tool and setup or any LLM more bespoke, giving yourself a clear line of execution through it, and then making that repeatable, right? We don't want to make this just like a one-time event. We want you to be able to do it over and over, and then ultimately scale your efforts and see the impact.
Chris Briest, welcome to the show.
Excellent. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How about yourself?
Awesome. Thanks. It's good to have you on. Chris, so we were introduced by Mel, who's one of the rock stars on the team here at Dynamico. So I want to maybe tell us a little bit about Mile High AI.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mile High AI is a consulting business that I started here about 8 months ago. Well, we're relatively new. I mean, I've been in the sales training space for my entire career. Well, we won't throw numbers out there, but with AI as really a passion for the last 2.5 years. So following my previous venture, where last couple of companies have been in SaaS, go to market, I've really just locked on to AI, but not to talk about, to figure out how do we make it work. So immediately, my focus was application to sellers. And following my last venture, I wanted to keep going with that. So really just focused in on, how do we help individual sellers? How do we help emerging companies? Really try to figure out how to break off AI. And again, the example I often use is it's the old riddle of how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I think a lot of people are looking at the AI elephant in the room and they don't know where to take that first bite. So, again, last couple of years has just been a huge focus to help people do that. Now I'm looking to take it a little bit further and help other organizations do the same.
Very cool. Awesome. So you just alluded to the fact that you had some, previously you had some roles as an enablement leader in a couple of, good size companies that people might have heard of before. Can you tell us what you learned, and if there's any link to your, let's say, your two previous roles for the last 5 or 6 years, that there's a link to what you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. Big link. I think for a long time, SaaS has continually started to struggle, right? And I think, when we look at the outbound motion and prospecting, that's been a struggle for a little while now. And I think, that personalized outreach kind of underpins it all for me. We're very used to, our XDR sending buyer-based persona messages to just these cards. We don't really know the person. Maybe we're not as in tune with the company outside of congratulations on the funding. I saw you're in a new role. And at the end of the day, that doesn't resonate. We're at a point in time where we all expect a really high degree of personalization. And as soon as we don't sense that personalization, right, our spidey senses start going off and we're like, was this for me? Is this a spray and pray? And, the companies that are still pushing that, I think are going to continue to face those struggles and more going forward. So, I mean, seeing that just over the last few years and just kind of progressively getting, tougher and tougher, that's been also one of the big focuses in the AI application that I do is how do we really scale personalized outreach? And I think it was great, when I first started doing this, and I would say personalized outreach, let's make personal messages to everybody you multi-thread, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people. The leaders would look at me with wide eyes and they go, we don't have time for that. What do you mean? We got to hit numbers, right? Volume. However, when you understand the right tools, you have the right process in place, and your team is tactically enabled to be able to execute that, it's pretty incredible what you're able to do. And in the short amount of time, I mean, we were able to reduce that prospecting and multi-threading time by 80% on average. That's a big reduction and a huge increase in capacity. So, I mean, seeing the struggles that those outbound teams have faced over the last few years and really seeing what, generative AI is capable of, especially when you make it the right way and you avoid those generic AI messages that I'm sure everyone is used to at this point, you can not only hit numbers, you can have better conversations.
Mm, mm. So I like where this is going. So what do you, from your perspective and from what you've learned, over the last, let's say, 2.5 years as you've been digging into this, like what is the key to personalized outreach for, in this case, outbound sales reps?
Yeah. Relevancy is key. Relevancy is key. And I'll completely admit, this was actually an AI generated quote when I was trying to come up with some marketing stuff, but it was saying, in a world full of busy inboxes, relevancy is your money, and AI is ultimately how you're going to make it. So if you're going to be relevant, if you're going to do that at scale, you need to be able to have, again, the right tool set. So I think, for personalization, that's where you really need to learn and take on AI fluency. And I think, a lot of people probably listening have, dabbled in, their own LLMs or chat GPT. They've had it rewrite an email or summarize something. At the end of the day, that's table stakes. That's stuff that we were doing a couple of years ago. Figuring out how to really bring in the relevant information, whether it's your, go-to-market assets like persona cards, marketing messages, brand info, sales process, and then helping your AI tool understand those things and be able to give you, again, a much better, crisper message that's not only going to sound like your brand, but we can make it relevant for that persona. And it's not just in the things that we think they care about, but within a couple of clicks, we can find out exactly what's going on at that company. What are those kind of calls to action, right? Maybe they missed some numbers last quarter and it's a very competitive market. Well, when we can quickly combine that information with, our personas and our understanding of those, that's the powerful message. That's what really gets people, I think, up and willing to respond and have a conversation.
That makes total sense. So how do you, so what is your approach? I guess maybe we'll start getting into tools here, which is totally good. How do you, let's just say, you're doing this with multiple clients, but let's just take one client. Let's say they have 25, outbound sales reps. What are you doing to enable them to achieve this relevancy that you're talking about?
Yeah, it's a combination of tools and tactics. Businesses are buying AI, and I have plenty of conversations where they go, "Well, we already have AI in our tech stack." Well, my challenge to them is understanding, what are you actually getting out of that? It might be pumping a lot of data, insights, intent, contact information in your business, which is great. I don't want people to give that up. What I challenge, though, is how well are the reps actually leveraging that now that they have it? Are they taking advantage of it? Are we actually getting good messages and better conversion out of that information? At the end of the day, I want people to not only understand how to execute well within AI, but I want them to understand how to bring all of these tools together, right? And not feel that they're all disparate. It's all over the place. I have too much AI at this point. So being able to take those tools, thread them together in kind of a coherent process to understand which tool, when, how it's relevant. And then again, tying that back to a clear process. The analogy I've been using lately, there's a new Grand Theft Auto game that's coming out. And if you've ever played it before, it's open world. You can run around and do a lot of stuff. And that's most LLMs. They can do, anything. However, until you play like the story or the campaign and you really understand that through line to the game, it can be really hard, to adopt it and ultimately make it a part of what you do day to day. So again, understanding how do we make it complementary to today's process and methodology. We're not replacing it, we're accelerating it. And then what are the tools that we need to bring in, whether they're in the tech stack today, or like you said, there's a lot of emerging companies that are still trying to identify what tool is going to be the right tool. So in my case, I custom make GPTs. I've Got a couple out there that are free to use, available for anybody. They have tens of thousands of uses across the globe in the last year. So they're very popular. We know they work. I do, other custom tooling that's much more bespoke to the individual company and has a lot of other kind of secret sauce behind the scenes. But it's once you bring those two things together, that's when the lights will start to turn on for teams.
Very cool. And then, so Chris, who are you typically working with? Like in your and what types of or sizes of business are your ideal clients?
Yeah, I kind of say the sweet spot right now are like, mid-market companies, especially tech, ones that might be in early round funding, maybe a little bit of a later stage. These are the teams that, again, are trying to do a lot with a little. They want to go fast. They want to be nimble. And so I think AI is a little bit easier, of a conversation to breach with them, where, enterprises, it takes a lot to be able to move something, right? Unless you've got a leader that's really vocal about it and is saying like, let's do this now. Getting them to change and adapt is definitely a challenge. So talk a lot with, leaders that are in GTM, CRO, heads of enablement. And, I focus a lot on sellers, but coming from the background of training and enablement, it is incredible, what you're able to do, not just to enable sellers to, do their day to day, but things like onboarding, things like continuing education and message adoption and making sure that, what's getting dripped down from the top is actually being seen in the field. So I would say, those sorts of roles are definitely the ones that are most interested. And I think the ones primed to be able to champion.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And then what would you say? I mean, is there like a common theme of the most common challenges that you're seeing that they're having? And if so, what are like the 1, 2, or 3 most common challenges that you're seeing that they could potentially fix by embracing, AI to essentially, find that relevancy and help enable those outbound sales reps?
Yeah, I mean, trying to do more with less, definitely the capacity thing. There's definitely not big hiring sprees across the industry. You see the little bursts here and there, but a lot of workforces have been reduced and they're trying to figure out how to get the most out of that existing workforce. So again, being able to scale the efforts. I had mentioned before that through, again, many pilots across global teams. This wasn't just a couple of US based teams. Again, we saw an average reduction of 80% in that prospecting time, which is non-revenue generating. So that by itself will increase an individual rep's capacity by almost 3 times. So theoretically, if you're able to make that many more calls, emails, just the numbers game by itself is going to help pay it off. But during this, we're doing personalization at scale, and for a lot of tech companies that do have a diverse buyer group, especially if you're in IT, there's a lot of hands, right, that come into that pot. So how do we make sure that our outbound is relevant to each of them? We can give all of them, a unique reason to come to the table. But then when I show up on that phone call, I better have some unique things to say to everybody, right? So my conversation is not just like CIO focused. I want everybody to feel like they've got a stake in this. And I think that's hard for a lot of outbound teams, especially since traditionally those, XDR type roles have been staffed by, people that are coming into their career and recent college graduates. They may not have that acumen yet. They might not understand, how to gather the right information and it's intimidating. But again, this is where the right tactics, tools, and process come into play, where very quickly you're able to understand that. The great thing about generative AI is you're then able to interact with it, whether it's asking questions or even doing like a voice to voice role play. I mean, I couldn't imagine that a decade ago, being able to like talk to a CIO before I have to go talk to a CIO, especially if I'm new, right? And I just haven't had that field experience. So getting that personalization at scale, being able to do a little bit more with less. And then I think, yeah, getting people ramped to that time to first deal and ultimately having better stakeholder conversations. That is something that I consistently hear across everybody.
Yeah, that also makes sense. So Chris, let's jump into I mean, I know, and I know that the people, process, and data component is critical to be successful in using the tools and the technology. But let's just dig into the sort of the tools or the tech stack for a little bit. So in your, I mean, if you're working with mid-market companies, they're, again, I'm pretty sure they're already using a CRM.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So are you then adding tools that sort of supplement the CRM, or are you doing things that help within the CRM that sort of automatically? So, for example, once you've worked with somebody for, I don't know how long your contracts are for, but let's just say whatever, whether it's like 3 months, 6 months, and they're sort of starting to see the value. And going back to that example of the 25 outbound sales reps, or 50, it doesn't really matter. When that sales rep sits down at 8 a.m. to start making calls, are they still using the same tool, or are they using a different set of tools?
Yeah. So ultimately, I am AI agnostic. If you've got, a generative AI tool internally, whether it's like Gemini, Copilot, ChatGPT Enterprise, I'm totally keen on that. I think, one common thing that I've been hearing is, well, we already have AI, right? It's in our CRM. We have Outreach that has AI in it. We have Gong that has intelligence. I'm going to be a little bit audacious. All of them fall short in a couple of areas. Even as we look at things like the Lavenders of the world, the Apollos of the world, the Clays of the world, a lot of these will do a great job of bringing information in. They may even automate, right, a first email. They may even, help the rep be able to, like LinkedIn, right, has some AI. It might bubble up. Here's something that's happening in the industry. What every single one of them is lacking, though, is a true end-to-end assistant that understands your brand, understands what you're trying to sell, how you sell it, who you compete with, and can support you in using that data. Tons of information out there. And I want every rep, right, to be able to have a true partner, not just that generic AI partner. And I'm going to keep coming back to that. And I can't wait to show you here in a little bit, kind of just some low hanging fruit that anybody can do right out of the gate to immediately, right, up level that experience. But you got some AI in your CRM. That's great. It's going to help you kind of quickly look at notes, maybe get some information in there. But at the end of the day, what it's not going to do is help you do robust research, turn that research into like a strategic point of view, a why us, why now, create unique messaging at scale that really leverages that. And again, some will create the messaging, but it's hey, you had a round of funding. You must have more money right now. We should have a conversation about how we can help you. That's not personal. That's not something that's going to get, more calls back. So having an assistant that's going to be able to take that to a new level and not just end there. Again, all the tools that I mentioned that will do some of those things, they end at that outreach. What about when we got to get ready for a discovery call? What about when we're on a discovery call? We're debriefing a discovery call. Now we're on to demos, RFPs, negotiations. Our sales process doesn't end at that first outreach message. So there's just not a lot really, or if any, people that are really looking at it from this more holistic sense. So when I come in with the tool, my answer is great that you have these other AIs. Here's what they do. Here's the value that we get out of them, the intent and the information. But here's how we bring it ultimately into like one place, one assistant that's really going to help us be able to work with it and use it throughout the entire deal cycle. And even if that deal goes cold, my assistant is going to be there waiting for me, and we can kick that back up when maybe I do get a call back.
And I guess so. And then, for some of the more traditional folks listening who might not be in the SaaS space, when you're talking about an assistant, you're essentially talking about an AI assistant, which might be, I guess, an agent or a collection of multiple agents. How would you, I guess, explain an assistant?
Yeah. So in the example that I'll give you here in a little bit, it can simply be a custom GPT in Chat GPT. That happens to be my LLM of choice, just because it is dynamic enough, unlike some of the other ones where I can do everything that I want to, not just some things. And I think when some people hear custom GPT, they're like, well, I don't know how to do that. That sounds like a lot. I actually run free sessions calling demystifying custom GPTs for sellers, because it is relatively simple, but as soon as you know kind of where to get started and how to give it just a few helpful pieces of information, not just about yourself, right? I'm Chris, here's what I do, but really about my brand, my value, kind of the marketing side, the competitive intel side. Those
Mm-hmm.
are the things that will really up level your message and be able to turn your research into relevant messaging. So that's really what I mean, is not just logging into chat GPT and saying like, help me sell. That's never going to go well. It's understanding just a couple of things that you can put together. And again, now have an assistant that understands you, your process, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I guess and when you're setting that up, of course, you're also then talking about who your ICP is, etc. So that again, the more, your point being, the more context you provide, the more helpful your assistant is going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've been on a tear with LinkedIn posts and that lately, just talking about context is king. You don't like what you're getting out of AI. Well, what are you putting into it? A lot of people say kind of, crap in, crap out. And that's completely true. If you're not giving it the information you want it to know, you can't expect it to know it.
Sure. Sure. So Chris, so yeah, I mean, what seems like a good step, if like for anyone who might be interested in sort of in a little more detail. I mean, we don't typically do sort of any real deep dives on the show, but I think if there's something that, I mean, I think that you think might be valuable to any revenue leader, enablement leader, CX leader, that might be looking for something like this, or is thinking about something like this, what else is there that you'd like to share that might be helpful?
Yeah, again, I think for a lot of people, it's making the choice that we're going to go down this road, understanding that there's going to be a little bit of an investment. There's going to be, that new factor for a lot of people, but in a very short amount of time, you see instant results. And from somebody who comes from, a training background and has been through a billion methodology trainings, I think what a lot of them are used to is, well, we hope in 6 to 8 weeks we start to see an uptick in conversion or this, that, and the other thing. But with generative AI, and again, the right tools, which I'll show you a couple that anybody can access right now, no matter what
Mm-hmm.
you sell, who you sell to, these are tools that you can get into, share a little bit of information, and we'll start giving you all the things that we've talked about so far. So I think just kind of making that decision, pushing yourself to go forward, is step number one. It's really where everybody gets stuck, and they're looking for somebody, they're looking for something to be able to help guide them, because it is very new. It's something that you really do need some expertise on, and that's where again Mile High AI definitely comes in. Been doing this for the last 2.5 years with global teams, so I know what works. I know what helps adoption. I know what hurts adoption, and I think a lot of companies who have tried to adopt it, it's just become another tool. So that's really my
Mm-hmm.
focus, is not just making it another tool, but understanding how it can essentially be the tool, your main assistant, to take advantage and really get the most ROI out of all the AI that you've invested in your tech stack. So yeah, and we don't even need to deep dive, but I'll be happy here to share my screen and just show within a few clicks what's possible, as well as those couple of tools that everyone can go out, jump into today. And again, just you get instant results as soon as you start using it. Just got to use it.
Right. Yeah. Let's do that in a second. I want to just, and of course, for the folks who listen to the show instead of watch the show, when if you are going to show something, I guess maybe just sharing kind of essentially what we're seeing. But before we jump into that, you mentioned adoption, and you mentioned like this sort of the new factor. Which of course comes to, again, is adoption is the single biggest reason that any implementation of any technology fails, right? Which I think with your training background, I think that's pretty obvious, but it's not as obvious to maybe a lot of the folks listening, where many of us as leaders still make the mistake of the shiny object syndrome, where we go and buy the technology and don't really think through what is involved in making it work the way that it should, and actually getting an ROI on the investment, or should I say return on the investment, to speak better English. But so as you get started with something like this, what do you feel is typically the because it is new, And it's so, with the adoption of any technology, it's new, which is why change management and training are such a critical component of a successful implementation of anything. But what is typically the biggest resistance that you're seeing in implementing this?
Yeah. The perception being that it's one more thing. Like you said, there's a billion things going on. I totally get that. There's a lot of different competing priorities. But if you can't make it part of your day-to-day and your process, you're not ready to actually integrate it to what folks are doing and how they're used to operating. It is. It's one more thing. And some folks that are much more technical, they'll grab onto it. They'll start doing things. I love my tenured sellers, but sometimes you can get stuck a little bit in the mindset of, I know what works. I know my process. I move really quickly this way. Don't try to add anything new in. And even when they have tried to adopt it in the past at that surface level of like, write me a sales email. Okay, that was garbage. I don't like that. I'm going to go, back to my old way. So focusing on how you solidify that into your sales process. And one of the exercises that I'll do is, map out what, a standard sales process will look like, what kind of methodology or unique nuances they might be using. But then by understanding their tech stack, and then also being able to show, some of the tools that I bring to the table, we map those together and we make it very clear where you start, what you need, and then again, where these other AI tools come into play, or where again, your assistant comes into play, which in my humble opinion, it comes into play the second you pull the company off your TAM, right? You're immediately jumping in to figure out who they are, what they do, and then it sticks with you all the way to the end. And just as if that person was sitting next to you, collaborating with you, it's getting in the habit of having that same degree of engagement. And I'll say, for a lot of the individuals that I coach, that's something that, I'll say it a dozen times in an hour. Sometimes it takes that 12th time to really resonate and go, this really is like an assistant, right? If I really do treat this like the person sitting next to me and not just take the outputs as static and kind of like we had with web results for years, we just go, well, guess the answer is the answer. Let me go somewhere else for info. Understanding how to ask the right questions, engage with it. And it's through that collaboration and, sharing insights that you find from other intent tools or notes that maybe you get handed to you before the discovery call. That's all things that you would give to your normal sales assistant. And when you understand that and you've got that generative AI in front of you, again, it is just accelerating what you would normally do, but you need to understand how and when it fits in. So it's not just another thing.
Mm-hmm. And then as you're doing that I like that idea, and it makes total sense of, I think salespeople are known to sort of want to keep things simple and they kind of stick to what they know works, even though I think they also realize that technology is changing and they probably do need to evolve, but at the same time, there's that they don't like to change like a lot of people. So is one of the strategies that you use, so knowing that they're going to go into this one more thing sort of mindset, do you sort of address it in a way where you can say, well, actually, so we're going to be adding something, but we're going to be removing 2 or 3 other things? Is that part of what you do potentially?
I wouldn't even necessarily say removing. Again, I focus on acceleration. They're going to be doing the things that they've done before. It's just they have a tool to be able to do it a heck of a lot faster. I mean, I'm sure we've seen the post about the dramatic changes in like Google results and utilization. This is why that's happening, where instead of just going straight to the company's website, maybe looking up a wiki, Googling a short question, you should now be having that conversation with generative AI. So I think, getting in the habit of moving away from the static web results and moving into the generative AI, that's the big difference, but we're still doing the same thing. We're still trying to understand at a high level, who are we dealing with? We're trying to go a layer down and figure out, how do we strategically sell to them? And then ultimately create messaging. We're augmenting the way that people work. It's great to automate stuff. I'm a lot more big on, empowering the individual and being able to give them just a different approach and an augmentation to their sales process.
Okay. Very interesting. So Chris, do you want to sort of dive in and just for a couple of minutes and just sort of walk us through how you do this and how you sort of visually sort of set up the process and the tool?
Yeah, again, I'll give people real easy access to a tool, couple of simple tips to get started. And if you follow these, you will see an immediate difference in the quality of output and your engagement with AI than most folks have seen before. Give me just a second, share the screen. All right. So I'll provide some of these links later and make sure that they're available. I have a guide on my website, gptpoweredselling.com, that lists all of these, tells you exactly how to start the process. And just to clarify, so GPT powered selling is really my branded approach for how you do augment selling as a team or as an individual, and take advantage of generative AI to power it. So one of the tools that I have out there that we'll start with is my SDR BDR sales research. And again, this is great for anybody who's prospecting, anybody who just needs to, again, get that better understanding of a company and start to turn that information into action. One of the very first things that you'll notice in here, and this is actually mine for my brand. As you can imagine, we're a young company. You're not going to go out on ChatGPT and it's not going to know everything about me as it would a public company or, even a mid-market. So this is what I call a context kit. So what I've attached here is just a really simple text file. It's made up of the things we mentioned before: my brand, my solution, how I solve problems, my fly zones, no fly zones, competitive intel. The same things that you would onboard a rep with are relevant for you to bring in and need to be GPT ready. So this is, again, nothing special or proprietary. These are all assets that you would probably be comfortable showing to a customer and are obviously floating around. So we're not going to expose anything proprietary. And I know that is an immediate concern of whether it's the InfoSec teams or the leaders, maybe it's just seeing more risk in AI. And that's, of course, part of the training. We, teach people what to do and not do. But by consolidating the best of this information and turning it into, at the very least, an attachment that you can bring in instantly, orders of magnitude will raise the level of quality that you're seeing. And again, the smaller you are, I work with a founding AE, it's him and the owner. They're needing to obviously do a lot of scaling. Company doesn't have, a huge footprint on the internet. So that can sometimes take a little bit more effort, but that investment is worth it and pays off very quickly. So what I'm going to do in this tool, just to kind of illustrate that, is instead of coming in here to just get generic research, I'm going to bring my brand information in, and I'm just going to give some very simple direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start here just with a very simple prompt. I'm going to say, I want to sell my GPT-powered solution to, we're going to put in a company name here. Let's use Snowflake. They're a tech company out there. Perhaps you've heard of them. So what we're going to see back here in just a second is what every seller is looking for initially. You're trying to just get an understanding of who is this company, what are the things that they offer, right? Kind of the space they play in, how do they make money? Already right off the bat, you're getting this information faster than you were. And I'm never going to expect sales reps to understand how to create complex prompts. And doing these copy and paste prompts off of templates, again, that's not helpful. That is slowing you down. What I want to offer is the time that I've taken to develop these prompts. And again, have an assistant that understands what we're here to do and help you get this information, not only quickly. And as we're reading through here, of course, I can ask questions. I can dig in. I can say, tell me a little bit more about this acquisition. Tell me a little bit more about these expansion plans or things that are going on in the industry. But where the value really starts to shine here and where people get excited is we're not just taking that data. We're actually going to be starting to tie in information about our solution. And again, where did that come from? That comes from the brand kit. That comes from bringing some of that information at the very beginning. So as I start to, read through here, or maybe let's say this expansion to India, right? I think that that's potentially juicy. Companies expanding, they're going to be looking to make sure that these other teams are getting up and running. They're able to maximize market share. I can dial in on that. Again, I'm the expert seller here. I don't want people to feel that AI is now driving them. You are in the driver's seat. You are driving AI. So I hope as you're reading through this, you happen to find some of these little nuggets. And I can select these. And let me just even say, how do I use this to sell? Again, you don't need to be complex with your prompts, especially in my tools, because what we are wanting to do is make it just very simple, very easy, right? Use just some very, very basic English. And again, what you're going to see here are not just a bunch of ideas, but these are ideas that best align with my solutions, my AI powered workflow, how we enable new sellers, how we scale message globally using our unique tools. And then we start to figure out, how do we articulate this? And again, this is where you get a big jump start, and you're going to see a difference in what's happened before when you said, write me a sales email. Pro tip, never use the word write me an email in ChatGPT. You've seen what that looks like. That's not an email a human would ever send. But the big benefit here is you now become more of a curator of your messaging. You don't have to be sitting in that dark room scratching your head and going, how do I maybe say this? And you start a sentence, you delete it, you don't think it's good enough. I would rather have a tool that bubbles up, right? Some ideas or a few messages and get me 70, 80, 90% of the way there. Allow me to then take it, drop it into my outreach tool, maybe do a little bit of customization. Again, if you've done your little kit right at the beginning, you've included some customer stories and things like that, it's going to automatically tie that in. If it sees that you've had success with a similar company and you increase their sales by 15% in a month, it's going to know that. It's going to make sure that that's part of your message. So again, I want to remove any barrier for reps having to do a lot of rework on the message, or even having to be overly explicit, right, about what should be in their message. This thing is designed to sell, and by including the right information, it's designed to sell on brand. One of the other tools that I'll show you here just real quick, if you've been in ChatGPT before, you might have seen that you can mention other GPTs. You use this little @ sign, and any other GPTs that you've used come into play, bring their expertise with them. There's another very popular one that I have out there. This one was the one that blew up first. It's called the 10K analyzer. Reps love this. If you've ever looked at a 10K, that being, the annual financial disclosure for any of our international friends, this is a big document, but it's juicy. It's talking about what's gone well, what's not gone well, forward-looking vision for, the future. So whether it's by using these tools by themselves, or in this case, I'm having these tools actually intermingle. I'm using one to help me research and get some ideas for messaging. I can bring in this analyzer to act a little bit more as a strategic expert. And I've just attached right now Snowflake's recent 10K, right? I earlier went down to their website, downloaded it. Now I'm simply uploading it as an attachment. So as part of my research here, by feeding this information into my assistant, again, it's becoming more informed to create more relevant messaging. So it's not just helping me, but as I go along, it's going to be able to bring in better and better insights. And look, this, I remember what that was, 60, 70 page 10K. We just saw here in about 5 seconds. It's given us a summary, which, okay, you can have any GPT do that. But look at this. We've identified key initiatives that best align with my solution. It even gives us a quote out of there that I can reference and I can ask questions about or dig into, and then start to get some ideas of exactly where I'm going to be able to add that value and kind of how I say it on brand. So whether it's reading through and finding initiatives, pain points, that's relevant. Coming back to that conversation, if you're not relevant and saying, I see that you are scaling into other companies, or into other countries. I see the expansion and the mass amount of hiring. And as somebody in enablement, I know the problems that can bring. You are
Uh-huh.
speaking their language. It's not just congratulations on the growth. Great, we've got a software, right? Let's have a
Uh-huh.
conversation. Buy more AI.
Uh-huh.
We can also again start to get some ideas of, not just the core messaging for, kind of the strategic approach. I generally refer to this as your point of view, your sales hypothesis. But then
Uh-huh.
again, quickly getting this into messaging, where if I just want to massage this a little bit, maybe bring a little bit of flavor, or worst comes to worst, I put my name at the top, my signature at the bottom, hyperlink a case study. I can have this out in the matter of a couple of minutes. And the great thing is at this point, you can just do a lot of rinse and repeat, right? Whether
Uh-huh.
it's coming up with more messaging, or preferably we start to turn this into, how do I communicate this to a CRO? If I know that that's the person I need to send an email to, I want to make sure, again, it's for the things they care about. And now if I got 10 other people I need to reach out to, I can bring in their LinkedIn profile, literally just paste the link in there, or maybe some, key details about them. Maybe
Uh-huh.
they're a little bit of a ghost town on that. Uh,
Uh-huh.
I can just use kind of what we know about CROs. And like I said, rinse and repeat very quickly in the matter of 5-10 minutes. I can hit on a dozen different personas, create multiple touch cadences for them, and they're all going to be unique, individualized, but most importantly, they're going to sound like your best rep. And that's what I always tell people to challenge me on, is if this is not sounding like your best rep, we've got a little bit
Uh,
more work to do.
right. Yeah. Very cool stuff, Chris. This is really, really powerful, as you can see. So um just as we so again, thanks so much for walking us through this. So one question that popped into my mind, because of what we do with helping businesses, you know ultimately optimize the value that they're getting out of their CRM, but knowing that a lot of this is moving into the realm of consulting to them on how they'll use AI going forward as well. What part of what you just shared with us there is being pulled by the rep back into the CRM, or is it being pulled back into the CRM?
Yeah, and that's part of kind of the hard part about where we're at in technology right now. So, what I showed you right now, these are my public tools. These are out there and available for anybody. I do have some proprietary tools that I offer to companies and that we're actually working on productizing and hopefully going to market with this year. That's going to be, the opportunity once you're outside of a chat GPT to make those integrations, whether it's to CRMs or to other tools. Like I mentioned
Uh-huh.
before, any CRM, I've had conversations with a lot of them. I've seen all the demos. They've got the table stakes things, but they haven't quite thought far enough yet about how to be able to do a lot of these things and more within their own, much less looking outside of themselves to figure out what is there that I can use to pull this in, because the Venn diagram of competition is prevalent. So I think that this requires a little bit of forward thinking. If I can give you quick my 5-year idea, there needs to be an ultimate assistant. Every tool has like an ask me anything. That's
Uh-huh.
useless. Why should I have 5 ask me anythings across all the tools? You should
Yeah.
have one assistant. You ask it anything, and through, right, like an agentic environment, it's going to be able to go out to these sources, pull in your recent gong call, pull in the recent contact details, go to your content management system and pull in the persona cards and competitive intel, all just through some very simple, whether it's natural language prompting, or one of the things that's kind of the IP behind the special tools I offer is what I call zero prompt commands, where you don't even know how, you don't need to write out sentences or half sentences like I just showed. You can literally within a single word or click be able to execute these things and move yourself through the
Uh-huh.
sales process. So there's going to be a lot of growth in figuring out how do you best bring these things. But yeah, ultimately right now it's understanding that you've got this assistant, where and how, information comes in, but then also to your point, how to be able to take the best of it out of there to update your CRM, to make your decks, to make your calls, even do your deal reviews, right? And have a really good QBR and look great in front of your GTM leaders. A lot of ways to leverage it, but right now you definitely as a rep need to be able to kind of understand how these things interplay. But eventually we'll get to that ultimate assistant and that ultimate ask anything.
Yeah. Wow. Which is, it's obviously very attractive to a lot of people, right? So, so so they're going to be, I mean, I know we could talk about this for hours, but there are two roles that I'd like to ask you a question about as far as how their mindset needs to, well, I'm not quite sure how we just saw balloons, but anyway, yeah. So there are two roles that have to go through a mindset shift if they haven't already done so, out of this conversation. One is whether it's the revenue leader, or the CEO. So, but let's just keep it to the revenue leader for now. And then the other one, of course, is the sales rep using all this new power and technology. What do you think that looks like? So what is, for each of those, what does that mindset shift need to look like?
Yeah. For revenue leaders, being blunt, it's making the choice to do it. That's it. Again, tons of conversations around people who are wanting to do it, but very few are like, okay, let's do it. Let's make the investment. Let's take the first step. I actually just made a post today, and I don't want to call it an existential crisis, but January 2nd was the middle of the year and actually puts us closer to 2050 than we are to the year 2000. If this isn't your timeline and call to action to be like, wow, I need to make sure I'm up to date with the most current AI, I don't know what is. So as a revenue leader, it's really making the choice, but then also I think, finding the right way to implement that. And you perceive the risk, and, there's other things that can kind of slow you down from making those bigger changes. But it's a change that if you don't make it, you're not going to be competitive in the market anymore. And your competition will likely make that change before you. So you've got to make the choice. You got to take the first step. I think from a rep standpoint, this is you understanding how to use the tools effectively so that you don't perceive that they're slowing you down. Again, I work with a number of individual sellers coaching. They're maybe with, smaller companies or companies that haven't taken that step yet, but they're an individual who sees the writing on the wall. They're like, I need to take this on. I want to differentiate myself. And I've been saying this for over 2 years now. It's very rare is AI going to replace you outright, especially in our job. It's going to often be the people who can use AI and be able to show up in that interview and say, I can do a little bit more. I can work a little bit faster. That's kind of the call to action for them is, again, working with myself or working with others to really see how you can make this tool and setup or any LLM more bespoke, giving yourself a clear line of execution through it, and then making that repeatable, right? We don't want to make this just like a one-time event. We want you to be able to do it over and over, and then ultimately scale your efforts and see the impact.
Yeah. And I guess like those individual sellers who are essentially investing in themselves and their futures, if the organization that they're currently at doesn't come along, in other words, if that more senior leader doesn't make the decision to invest the time and the resources into this, they would be very marketable at any other company who has already decided to make that move and is looking for sellers who actually who already know how to do this, right?
Yeah. Or especially, again, you're a younger seller, you're maybe in that BD role, you're trying to move into more of an account executive or strategic role. There's your differentiator to not only stand out, but to be able to show that you can go to this new level and even compete with those more tenured sellers who have been doing it. They have the insights in their head, but you'll be able to get those insights quicker. And again, ultimately utilize them, I think, in a better, more strategic way than we can just sitting by ourselves in a room.
Yeah. Very cool. Very powerful. Chris, so last question as we wrap up here. So let's just sort of keep on that vein of, whether it's any sort of C-suite leader who is going to be impacted by this. And right now I don't see any that aren't, whether you're the revenue leader, the CFO, the CEO, the COO, you name it. Everybody is going to be impacted by whether they they make this move or not. And in fact, I've been sharing a bit on LinkedIn too, and I'm going to be interviewing Jeff Woods, who wrote the book AI Driven Leader, in the next few weeks. And he and many others like you in the space are talking about how 100% of leaders know that AI is going to change their business, but only 5% of them are actually doing something about it, right? Which is a very stark and very scary statistic. But and it's not unusual, right? This has happened with every technology sort of revolution that's happened in the past, and hopefully in a year from now it'll be 10 or 15%, and then it's a typical adoption curve. But what are your final words of advice to those leaders of, let's just say, mid-market companies who are currently trying to figure out what to do next?
Yeah. Other than just saying, do it, let's find a couple of low-hanging fruits that we can grab at. Again, there's so many things that AI can tackle. And I think, we get really wide-eyed. We talk about all the possibilities. It becomes overwhelming. And now it seems like it's too much. And we've got other fish we need to fry. There's a lot of things that we can do that are quick wins. Even just what I showed you today, being able to quickly do research, quickly turn it into relevant insights, quickly turn it into persona-based messaging. You will have stronger conversations instantly. You are spending less time instantly. And again, we can branch off into a lot of other aspects of, again, the sales process or post-sales. We haven't even talked about that, but account managers, CSMs, there's a lot there for them, value engineering. Yep. But before you get there and before you maybe think about an entire GTM transformation, AI-powered playbooks and, all this other stuff, let's just get a couple of basic tools like this into the hands of reps. Make sure that we encourage utilization, right? We've got frontline manager buy-in, and sit back and watch. At that point, again, you see the results, you'll hear the conversations, you'll see those insights being brought in. And one of my most favorite pieces of feedback that I would get early on from the people who adopt is customers outright saying, wow, you are a little bit better researched, or you seem to know a little bit more than the other 5 sales reps that I spoke to. That's powerful. You are relevant. You are now a partner to them. You're not just another salesperson coming into the door, but that all starts with understanding how to break off just a little bit with the tools and use them to become the most relevant seller in the room.
Yeah, very cool. That's a great place to wrap up. Chris, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm sure whatever you've shared with us today is going to be super valuable to a lot of our listeners and our audience. So thanks so much, and I look forward to watching the space with you over the coming months.
It's going to be an interesting time. Thanks for having me today, Brendon.
Take care, Chris.
Cheers.
Did you enjoy this episode?
Find more at RevOpsChampions.com.